Welcome to the channel. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, you're not alone. For the next 2 hours, let your thoughts fade as these unsettling stories fill the silence. If you're watching this right now, tap the like button and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Let the darkness settle and let the stories take over. The gentle rocking of the train had always been a comfort to me. Something about the rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks, the occasional whistle cutting through the night, the way landscapes blur into watercolor paintings outside the window. It all felt like a lullaby for adults. That's why I chose to take the Coast Starlight from Seattle to Los Angeles rather than fly. 35 hours of peaceful solitude, watching America's western shores roll by while I sorted through the wreckage of the past year. I boarded in Seattle on a Wednesday evening in late October. The train wasn't crowded, just a handful of retirees with time to spare, a few families with children too young to appreciate the scenery, and people like me who had reasons to avoid flying or simply preferred the slower pace of rail travel. I had splurged on a small private compartment with a fold-down bed and a window that would frame the Pacific coastline for much of the journey. "First time on the Coast Starlight?" asked the attendant who showed me to my compartment. Her name badge read Eleanor, and the lines around her eyes suggested she'd made this journey hundreds of times. "First time on any long-distance train, actually," I replied, settling my backpack beside the small fold-down table. Eleanor smiled. "Well, Mr. Miller, you're in for a treat. The stretch between Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo is worth the entire fare." She pointed out the emergency procedures card and showed me how to recline my seat before leaving me to settle in. The first few hours passed quietly as we rolled through Washington and crossed into Oregon. I watched cities and towns shrink into pinpricks of light behind us, each one carrying its own collection of lives and stories I would never know. The dining car served a surprisingly decent salmon with roasted vegetables, and I struck up a conversation with a retired geology professor who was making his 14th trip along this route. "You notice different things each time," he told me, his weathered fingers tracing invisible pathways on the tablecloth. "The landscape is always changing. Erosion, growth, human development. Nothing stays the same, not even mountains." I thought about his words as I returned to my compartment and prepared for sleep. My own life had certainly demonstrated that principle over the past year. My 15-year marriage eroded away, the foundation of what I thought was permanent proving as changeable as coastal cliffs. I fell asleep to the gentle sway of the train, thankful for the white noise that drowned out my thoughts. I awoke briefly as we stopped in Sacramento around 6:30 a.m. New passengers boarded, their muffled voices and footsteps in the corridor outside my compartment, briefly disturbing the rhythm of the journey. Among them was a group of 3 men who caught my attention only because they seemed so ill-suited to train travel. Tense, checking watches repeatedly, carrying only small backpacks, despite clearly embarking on the long journey south. But the observation slipped away as I drifted back to sleep for another hour. By mid-morning, we were winding through California's Central Valley. I spent time in the observation car, my laptop open but forgotten as I watched agricultural fields stretch to the horizon. I noticed the 3 men from Sacramento sitting together, speaking in low voices, occasionally glancing around as if checking who might be listening. There was nothing overtly suspicious about them. They were dressed casually in jeans and light jackets, appearing to be in their 30s or early 40s. Yet something about their demeanor felt discordant with the relaxed atmosphere of the train. "Some folks just aren't comfortable with the pace," said a voice beside me. I turned to find Eleanor, the attendant from the previous night. First-time train travelers get antsy around hour 12, when they realize how slowly America passes by. I nodded, but wasn't convinced that explained their behavior. One man had a distinctive tattoo peeking from his sleeve, geometric shapes that seemed military in their precision. Another kept checking what looked like a topographical map rather than the route guide provided to passengers. "We'll be hitting the coastal stretch soon," Eleanor continued. "Best views of the journey coming up." As if on cue, the landscape began to change. The inland valley gave way to rolling hills, and eventually, we caught our first glimpses of the Pacific Ocean. Most passengers gravitated toward the west-facing windows, cameras ready, all except the three men, who seemed completely uninterested in the views everyone else had paid to see. The afternoon progressed, and the coastal scenery became increasingly spectacular. We passed through small beach towns where people waved at the train, crossed bridges spanning dramatic ravines, and hugged cliffs where the tracks seemed impossibly close to the ocean below. The dining car served lunch, and I found myself seated across from a young couple heading to Los Angeles for their honeymoon. "We thought this would be more romantic than flying," the woman explained, her hand linked with her husband's on the table. "More time to enjoy being together." I smiled and offered congratulations while trying not to think about my own honeymoon years ago. As we ate, I noticed one of the three men walk through the dining car, glancing at his watch before making eye contact with another of his companions seated at the far end. A subtle nod passed between them. After lunch, I returned to my compartment to call my sister in San Diego. The connection was spotty as we passed through sections of remote coastline. "How's the Great Escape going?" she asked, her voice cutting in and out. "It's actually peaceful," I replied. "I needed this time to..." The call dropped as we entered a tunnel. When we emerged, I noticed we were slowing down for no apparent station. Outside my window, the tracks ran along a particularly dramatic section of coastline. Sheer cliffs on one side dropping hundreds of feet to rocky beaches and steep hills rising on the other. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but also remarkably isolated. That's when I saw one of the three men hurry past my compartment, speaking urgently into a cell phone despite the known poor reception in this area. The train came to a complete stop. Such delays weren't uncommon on Amtrak routes. Freight trains took priority on shared tracks, and we'd already experienced minor delays. But something about this felt different. We were in the middle of nowhere, the ocean stretching endlessly to the west, uninhabited hills to the east. The PA system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay. Please remain in your seats or compartments while we assess the situation." I peered out my window, trying to see what might be happening ahead. That's when I noticed one of the three men exiting a service door at the end of my car, disappearing alongside the train rather than staying inside as instructed. Curiosity and unease propelled me to my compartment door. I slid it open just enough to look down the corridor, where I saw the second man emerging from the bathroom carrying his backpack, which now appeared heavier and bulkier than before. "Excuse me," I called out, surprising myself. "I think someone just went outside." The man froze for just a moment, eyes meeting mine with a coldness that sent a chill through me. Then he smiled, a practiced, empty gesture. "Probably just staff checking the tracks," he replied, voice casual, but fingers gripping his backpack straps with white knuckles. He turned away, moving toward the same service door his companion had used. Something was very wrong. I closed my compartment door and looked outside again. We were stopped on a section of track that curved around a cliff face. From my vantage point, I could see a small figure moving along the outside of the train several cars ahead, crouching beside the tracks. Even from a distance, I recognized the distinctive geometric tattoo on his arm. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Were they inspecting something? No. Amtrak staff wore uniforms and wouldn't be behaving so secretively. I watched in horror as the man placed something on the tracks and then quickly moved to another spot. They were sabotaging the train. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Of course, that's why they'd chosen this location. I looked around my small compartment for the emergency call button and pressed it repeatedly. Nothing happened. Had they disabled the system somehow? I had to find a crew member. I opened my compartment door cautiously, checking the corridor before stepping out. It was empty. I moved quickly toward the front of the car, passing through to the next. Passengers looked up curiously as I hurried past, some assuming I was just heading to the bathroom, others noticing my obvious distress. "Sir, please return to your seat," called an attendant I didn't recognize. "We'll be moving shortly." "Listen," I said urgently, keeping my voice low. "There are men sabotaging the tracks. I saw them placing something." The attendant's expression changed from annoyed to alarmed. "Are you certain?" "Yes," I insisted. 3 men who boarded in Sacramento. One has geometric tattoos on his arm. They've been acting strange all day." Before the attendant could respond, the 3rd man appeared at the far end of the car. Seeing us in conversation, his hand moved to his waistband, a movement so subtle yet unmistakably threatening that my words died in my throat. "Come with me," the attendant said quietly, guiding me through a service door into a narrow staff passageway. "What exactly did you see?" I described the men and their activities as concisely as possible as we moved through the restricted area toward the front of the train. The attendant, whose badge read Marcus, radioed ahead to the conductor. "We've had alerts about potential threats to this route," Marcus admitted as we hurried forward. "Extremist groups have been targeting infrastructure, especially in remote areas where response is difficult." My mind raced. But why this train? This section? This stretch of track runs along an environmentally sensitive coastline. There's been controversy about the railway's impact on erosion. Some groups want the coastal route shut down permanently. We reached the conductor's compartment, where 2 other crew members were already on emergency radios attempting to contact authorities. The engineer was scanning the track ahead through binoculars. "I count 2 devices visible from here," the engineer reported. "Can't tell what they are, but they're not railroad equipment. Highway Patrol is dispatching, but they're at least 30 minutes out," one of the radio operators announced. "Air support will take longer." The conductor turned to me. "Can you identify these men from security footage?" I nodded. "Ha," and he led me to a small monitor showing feeds from cameras positioned throughout the train. We quickly located 2 of the men, moving purposefully through the observation car. The 3rd was nowhere to be seen. "They're heading for the baggage car," the conductor said grimly. "That's where they'd have the most impact." What happened next unfolded with surreal speed. The crew enacted emergency protocols, locking down the locomotive and alerting staff throughout the train via coded announcements that passengers wouldn't understand. 2 crew members who apparently had security training retrieved locked cases containing what I presumed were weapons. "We need to move passengers away from the devices and from those men," the conductor decided. Car by car, starting from the rear. I found myself assisting, helping Eleanor and other attendants move confused and increasingly frightened passengers forward through the train under the pretense of a mechanical issue requiring weight redistribution. Most complied without question, but the atmosphere grew tense as people sensed something more serious was happening. We had evacuated 3 cars when a commotion erupted ahead. One of the men had realized what was happening and attempted to force his way into the locked baggage car. A quick-thinking attendant had triggered an emergency door closure, trapping him between cars. That's when we heard the first explosion, not from the tracks as expected, but from the rear of the train, where we'd already evacuated passengers. The blast wasn't catastrophic, but strong enough to rock the train and shatter windows. Screams erupted as passengers panicked. "They're trying to cause a derailment," the engineer shouted over the chaos. "If those devices on the track detonate while we're moving." The implications were horrifying. We were balanced on a stretch of track with a sheer cliff dropping to the ocean on one side. A derailment here would be catastrophic. The next hours were a blur of crisis management. The two security-trained crew members subdued one of the saboteurs, but the other two barricaded themselves in a bathroom with what they claimed was another explosive device. Passengers were moved as far forward as possible. Many crammed standing room only into the dining and observation cars. Eleanor proved remarkably calm under pressure, organizing passengers into groups and assigning those with medical training to assist anyone in distress. I found myself working alongside her, drawing on crisis management skills I developed during my former career. "You're good at this," she remarked during a rare quiet moment. "Most people fall apart." "I spent 20 years as an emergency room nurse," I explained. "This is different, but panic looks the same everywhere." Highway patrol officers finally arrived via helicopter, rappelling down to the train since there was no place to land on the narrow coastal shelf. They brought bomb disposal experts, who carefully removed the devices from the tracks, while negotiators dealt with the remaining saboteurs. It was nearly midnight when we finally began moving again, proceeding at a crawl to the nearest station, where buses waited to transport passengers the rest of the way. The authorities interviewed me at length about what I'd observed, and I learned the men were indeed part of an extremist environmental group that believed destroying the coastal railway would force its permanent closure. As I finally boarded a bus bound for Los Angeles in the early morning hours, Eleanor approached me one last time. "Thank you," she said simply. "Your observation saved lives today." I nodded, too exhausted for more words. As the bus pulled away from the station, I watched the coast starlight standing silent on the tracks. What had begun as a journey to escape my troubled past had instead thrust me into a crisis where my most valuable skills proved to be watchfulness and a willingness to speak up when something felt wrong. The landscapes that had seemed so soothing just a day earlier now passed by the bus window, imbued with a new awareness of vulnerability. Yet somehow, I felt more present, more alive than I had in months. Sometimes I realized the most haunting journeys are the ones that bring us face to face not with supernatural horrors, but with the very human capacity for both destruction and heroism. I should have known better than to agree to house sit in Minnesota during January. My cousin Elaine had painted it as a favor that would benefit us both. She and her husband Greg needed someone reliable to watch their remote countryside home while they vacationed in Belize for 2 weeks, and I needed a quiet place to finish writing my thesis. "It's peaceful, Rachel," she'd said. "No distractions, great internet, and the pantry will be fully stocked. The perfect writing retreat." What she'd conveniently downplayed was how isolated the house was. A sprawling 2-story farmhouse renovated with modern amenities but still sitting on 20 acres of land, the nearest neighbor a mile down the road. She'd also glossed over the weather forecast, which had mentioned the possibility of snow, but not the approaching winter storm that would later be named Winter Storm Atlas. I arrived on a Sunday afternoon. The sky hung low and gray, threatening snow, but not yet delivering. Elaine and Greg had left early that morning, but she'd texted detailed instructions about the house, how to work the fancy thermostat, which day the garbage needed to go out, and most importantly, explicit instructions not to enter the locked guest room on the second floor. "We're storing some valuable antiques for Greg's mother," she'd explained. The lock is temperamental, so just leave it alone. You have the entire rest of the house to yourself. I didn't think much of it at the time. Old houses have their quirks, and the 4-bedroom farmhouse offered more than enough space for one graduate student and her laptop. The first snow began falling that evening, gentle flakes that accumulated slowly, transforming the landscape into a scene from a Christmas card. I settled into a pleasant routine, writing during the day at the kitchen table, overlooking the vast backyard and snowy fields beyond, taking breaks to make coffee in their expensive machine or choose something to stream on their massive living room TV. The forecast warned of heavier snow to come, but I wasn't concerned. I had everything I needed: food, sheep, internet. If anything, the impending snowfall would remove any temptation to procrastinate by driving into town. By Tuesday evening, the snow was falling more heavily, the wind driving it sideways against the windows. I made a fire in the living room fireplace and was enjoying the cozy atmosphere when the first strange thing happened. A thump from upstairs, like something heavy had fallen. I paused the movie I was watching and listened. Nothing followed. I dismissed it as the house settling. These old farmhouses made all sorts of noises as they expanded and contracted with temperature changes. Still, I found myself glancing toward the ceiling more often as the evening progressed. Later that night, as I was preparing for bed in the master bedroom, Elaine had insisted I use it rather than one of the smaller bedrooms. I noticed the door to the locked guest room directly across the hallway. Nothing remarkable about it. A standard wooden door with an old-fashioned keyhole beneath the knob. But something about the way it sat in its frame caught my attention. It seemed slightly ajar, perhaps a quarter-inch gap between door and frame. I frowned, approaching it. Had Elaine left it that way? I pushed gently, but the door didn't budge. Locked, as expected. I decided the gap was just another quirk of the old house and went to bed, pulling the master bedroom door firmly closed behind me. I woke to a transformed world. Overnight, Winter Storm Atlas had arrived in earnest, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow with more falling rapidly. The wind howled around the eaves, and looking out the bedroom window, I could barely make out the shape of my car, now just a white mound in the driveway. I checked my phone. Spotty service, but enough to load a weather alert warning people to shelter in place. Roads were impassable. The forecast predicted another 2 days of heavy snow before the storm would pass. When I went downstairs, I noticed the temperature had dropped significantly, despite the thermostat being set to 72 degrees. I checked the heating system and discovered it was running constantly, but struggling against the extreme cold. I made a mental note to keep the fireplace going throughout the day. The power flickered several times as I made breakfast, a warning of what might come. I located Elaine's emergency supplies: candles, matches, flashlights, and a battery-powered radio. The pantry was indeed well stocked with non-perishables. I would be fine, I assured myself, even if the power went out. I tried to focus on my thesis, but concentration proved difficult with the constant moaning of the wind and occasional creaking of the house. Around mid-afternoon, I heard it again, a distinct thump from upstairs, followed by what sounded like scraping. This time, concern propelled me up the stairs. The hallway was noticeably colder than the rest of the house. I checked each room methodically. The 2 spare bedrooms, the upstairs bathroom, the small office. Nothing seemed disturbed. That left only the locked guest room. Standing outside it, I noticed the gap between door and frame had widened slightly. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard nothing. After a moment's hesitation, I tried the knob again. Still locked. "Hello?" I called, feeling foolish even as I did so. Only the wind answered, whistling more sharply now as it found some entry point into the old house. The power went out just after sunset. One moment I was making dinner in the electric kitchen, the next I was standing in perfect darkness. I fumbled for my phone and used its flashlight to locate the emergency candles. Soon I had transformed the living room into a warm haven, the fireplace crackling and candles casting long shadows across the walls. I tried calling Elaine but couldn't connect. Text messages showed as unsent. The storm had knocked out cell service completely. The isolation I had initially welcomed now took on a different quality. Not peaceful solitude, but complete separation from the outside world. That night, I slept downstairs on the sofa, rather than return to the master bedroom. I told myself it was more practical to stay near the fireplace, but truthfully, I didn't want to walk past that guest room door in the dark. Sleep came fitfully. The storm had reached its peak, the wind so powerful it seemed to shake the foundation of the house. Sometime in the early hours, I jerked awake, disoriented, certain I'd heard something beyond the storm, a rhythmic sound like footsteps crossing the floor above me. I lay frozen, straining to hear over my pounding heart and the howling wind. The footsteps, if that's what they were, moved from one end of the upstairs hallway to the other, directly above where I lay. Then silence. I clutched the blanket tighter, telling myself it was just the house protesting against the storm. Old structures made noise. This was normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was moving around upstairs. Morning couldn't come soon enough. When gray light finally filtered through the windows, I built up the fire and tried to shake off the night's fears. The storm had begun to abate, though snow still fell steadily. According to the battery radio, roads might be cleared within 48 hours. I needed to check upstairs, if nothing else to put my mind at ease. Gathering my courage, I climbed the stairs, my footsteps sounding unnaturally loud in the silent house. The upstairs hallway was freezing, far colder than could be explained by the heating being off. My breath clouded in front of me as I approached the guest room. The door was now definitely ajar, at least 2 inches of gap showing. Through it, I could see nothing but darkness. I stood before it, paralyzed with indecision. Elaine had been clear about not entering, but something was wrong. What if a window had broken in the storm? Freezing air and moisture could damage those supposed valuable antiques. Surely that would justify checking? "Hello," I called again, louder this time. "Is anyone there?" Silence greeted me, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door. It swung open with surprising ease, revealing a room that defied all expectations. There were no antiques, no storage boxes. Instead, the room was set up as a bedroom, a neatly made twin bed against one wall, a small dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. Children's drawings hung on the walls, and a collection of stuffed animals sat arranged on a shelf. The room looked like it belonged to a child of perhaps 8 or 9. But Elaine and Greg had no children. In the 5 years they'd owned this house, they'd never mentioned a child staying here or decorating a room this way. I stepped inside, shivering in the unnatural cold. The window was intact, no source for the frigid temperature evident. On the dresser sat a silver-framed photograph I couldn't quite make out from the doorway. I moved closer, picked it up, and felt ice form in my veins. The photo showed a solemn-faced girl with dark hair pulled back in twin braids. She wore a dress that looked decades out of date. Written at the bottom of the frame in delicate script was a name, Abigail, 1977. I set the photo down with trembling hands and backed toward the door. Who was Abigail? And why had Elaine and Greg kept this room, clearly preserved as some sort of shrine, a secret? Before I could reach the hallway, the door slammed shut with such force it seemed to shake the walls. I lunged for the knob, twisting desperately, but it wouldn't budge. Locked from the outside. Panic rose in my throat as I pounded on the door. "Help! Is someone there?" Only silence answered. I pressed my ear against the wood but heard nothing in the hallway beyond. I was trapped in a stranger's preserved bedroom, in a powerless house during a blizzard, with no way to call for help. I turned back to the room, trying to control my breathing. Think logically. The door might have slammed from a draft. Houses this old were full of strange air currents. I needed to find another way out, or wait for whatever had locked the mechanism to reset itself. The window was the obvious alternative, but when I tried to open it, the frame wouldn't budge. Painted shut long ago, or perhaps frozen. Through the glass, I could see the storm had temporarily abated, weak sunlight reflecting blindingly off unbroken snow, stretching to the tree line hundreds of yards away. I could break the glass as a last resort, though the drop to the ground was considerable, and I'd be letting freezing air into the house. I decided to try the door again. As I turned from the window, the temperature in the room plummeted further. My breath now formed thick clouds, and the cold burned my lungs. The rocking chair by the window began to move, gently at first, then with increasing vigor. No draft could explain this motion. It moved as if someone invisible sat there, deliberately rocking. Then came the sound, a soft humming, a child's tuneless melody coming from nowhere and everywhere. I backed against the wall, eyes darting around the empty room. "Who's there?" My voice emerged as a whisper. The humming stopped, the rocking chair stilled. Then a child's voice, so clear and close it might have been right beside my ear. "Why are you in my room?" I yelped, spinning around but saw no one. "I'm sorry?" I stammered to the empty air. "I didn't know. I'm house sitting for Elaine and Greg." A drawer in the dresser slid open, then slammed shut with a bang that made me jump. They never let anyone in my room. The voice had moved, now seeming to come from near the bed. They promised to keep it just as it was. My mind raced. This couldn't be happening. There had to be a logical explanation. Stress, sleep deprivation, carbon monoxide from the fireplace downstairs. Who are you?" I asked, pressing myself against the wall. "Abigail." The temperature dropped again, frost now forming on the window. This was my house before them, my room. They promised to keep it safe. I thought of Elaine's insistence that I not enter this room, her vague explanation about antiques. Had she and Greg known about this presence? Had they made some sort of pact with it when they bought the house? "I didn't mean to intrude," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you unlock the door, I'll leave and won't come back." Silence followed, so prolonged I began to hope whatever experience I was having had ended. Then the voice returned, now sounding like it came from right in front of me. It's been so long since I had company. What followed was the most surreal day of my life. The door remained locked, and I remained trapped in Abigail's room as daylight gradually failed and night approached again. The presence, whatever or whoever it was, seemed to grow stronger as darkness fell. Small objects moved on their own. The hairbrush on the dresser sliding across the surface, the stuffed animals rearranging themselves. The temperature fluctuated wildly, sometimes so cold I could see frost forming on the wooden floor, sometimes returning to normal for brief periods. And all the while, that voice spoke to me. Sometimes childlike and curious, sometimes angry, sometimes taking on a disturbing adult quality that sent chills through me worse than the literal cold. I learned fragments of a story. Abigail had lived in this house in the 1970s. She'd been ill, something chronic that had confined her often to this room. The house had been her world. She spoke of parents who argued, of doctors who couldn't help, of watching the seasons change through the window. "How did Elaine and Greg end up with your house?" I asked during one of the calmer periods, huddled on the floor with my back against the wall, too exhausted to maintain my fear at its earlier peak. "They bought it after." The voice had that unsettling adult quality again. "They found me here. They understood what I needed." "What did you need?" I whispered. "To keep my room." To stay home, they agreed. No one would disturb me. I thought of the locked door, Elaine's firm instructions. Did they know you would be active? A child's giggle echoed around the room. Only when someone breaks the rules. Night fell completely. Without power, the room was pitch black, except for faint moonlight reflecting off the snow outside. The voice grew more erratic, sometimes seeming to speak to people who weren't present, reliving moments from a past life. Objects moved more violently now, the rocking chair slamming against the wall, drawers opening and closing rapidly. I curled into a corner, covering my head, certain that I would not survive until morning. Dawn arrived with unexpected silence. The paranormal activity had ceased sometime in the night, though I couldn't say when. I must have finally passed out from exhaustion. I woke stiff and cold but alive. The door stood open. I staggered to my feet, hardly daring to believe it. The hallway beyond was empty and silent. Weak winter sunlight streamed through windows, revealing a house that seemed perfectly normal. The power had returned. I could hear the heating system humming. I approached the door cautiously, half expecting it to slam shut again, but nothing happened. In daylight, even the bedroom seemed less sinister, just a preserved child's room from decades past. I slipped into the hallway and pulled the door firmly closed behind me. Downstairs, I found my phone charging where I'd left it. Service had been restored, and messages from Elaine had accumulated overnight. Storm looks bad. Everything okay? Rachel, power outages reported in your area. Check in when you can. And finally, sent just an hour ago. Weather clearing. Roads being plowed. Please let us know you're safe. My fingers shook as I typed a response. I'm fine. Storm was bad, but house is okay. Power back on now. I hesitated, then added, I need to ask you about the locked room upstairs. Her response came almost immediately. You went inside? The door was open, I typed, not entirely a lie. Who was Abigail? 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her answer finally came through. Greg's sister. She died in that room when she was 9. Blood infection. The house belonged to his parents. When they decided to sell, we bought it with the promise to keep her room intact. Greg couldn't bear to have it changed. The explanation was so mundane, so human, it almost disappointed me. Almost. The room gets cold, I wrote. Did you know that? A long pause. Then, yes, Greg says it always was. Something about the heating ducts. But there was something in the careful way it was phrased that told me Elaine knew more than she was admitting. Perhaps they'd experienced things too. Perhaps the locked door had been as much to protect unknowing guests as to honor a promise. I packed my belongings quickly. The plows had cleared the main road, and though the driveway was still buried, I could dig my car out enough to leave. I wouldn't stay another night in that house. As I worked to free my car, I glanced up at the second-floor window, Abigail's window. For just a moment, I thought I saw a small face looking down at me, a child with dark braids and solemn eyes. Then it was gone, just the reflection of clouds on glass. I drove away as quickly as the snow-covered roads would allow, watching the farmhouse recede in my rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. I never told Elaine exactly what happened in that room. I never house sat for them again. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some promises better left unbroken. But sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind howls around my apartment building, I think I hear a child's tuneless humming and the gentle creak of a rocking chair. And I wonder if Abigail found a way to follow me home. The weather alert blared through my phone at 3:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was sitting at my desk in our farmhouse, trying to concentrate on work while stealing glances at the darkening sky through the window. The National Weather Service had issued a severe storm warning for our county in rural Oklahoma, but we'd heard these warnings before. Usually they amounted to nothing more than heavy rain and some wind. This one's different. My neighbor Ed had told me that morning when I saw him at the general store. Barometric pressures dropping faster than I've seen in years. My joints are screaming. Ed's weather predictions, based on his arthritic knees, were strangely more reliable than the meteorologists on Channel 8. I glanced at my phone again. The alert contained words like catastrophic and life-threatening that I wasn't accustomed to seeing. Outside, the wind had picked up, bending the tall grass in waves across our 5 acres. The chickens had gone quiet, always a bad sign. My wife Sarah was in the city for work, a 2-hour drive away. I called her immediately. "Don't try to drive home," I said when she answered. "Stay in Oklahoma City tonight." "It can't be that bad," she replied. I could hear the skepticism in her voice. "The sky looks fine here. Sarah, please. This one feels different." Perhaps it was the urgency in my voice that convinced her. She agreed to book a hotel room downtown, away from the storm's projected path. I hung up and breathed a sigh of relief. At least she would be safe. Now I needed to prepare for what was coming. By 5 p.m., the world outside had transformed. The sky had turned a sickly greenish gray, the kind of color that makes your stomach knot with primal fear. The birds had vanished entirely, and an eerie silence had settled over our property, broken only by the increasingly violent gusts of wind. I moved methodically through our emergency checklist. Flashlights with fresh batteries placed strategically around the house. Battery-powered radio tuned to the emergency broadcast station. Bathtub filled with water. Propane stove ready in case the power went out. Storm cellar stocked and prepared. Our cellar was an old-fashioned concrete bunker, built by the previous owners in the 1960s. Sarah had wanted to renovate it when we bought the place 3 years ago, but other projects had taken priority. Now, as I checked our supplies, bottled water, canned food, first aid kit, blankets, I was grateful for its solid construction, despite the musty smell and outdated design. The meteorologist on the radio was using words like supercell and rotation. The storm was intensifying, and our county was now under a tornado watch. I texted Sarah to let her know I was prepared and would head to the cellar if necessary. Her reply came quickly. "Stay safe, I love you." 3 simple words that suddenly carried so much weight. The power went out at 7:12 p.m. One moment I was watching the weather radar on TV, tracking the massive storm system heading directly for us. And the next, I was in complete darkness, save for the strobing flashes of lightning outside. The wind had become a constant roar, punctuated by the sharp cracks of breaking branches. Rain lashed against the windows with such force I feared the glass might shatter. I moved away from exterior walls, remembering the safety protocols I'd read but never expected to use. My phone buzzed with another alert. Tornado warning. Take shelter immediately. I grabbed my emergency bag, my phone, and the leash for our dog Max. He was already anxious, pacing and whining near the cellar door as if he understood what was coming better than I did. "Come on, boy," I urged, clipping on his leash. "We're going downstairs." As we made our way to the cellar entrance on the side of the house, I had to lean into the wind to make any progress. The rain felt like needles against my skin. Max pulled against the leash, either trying to run away from the storm or urging me to move faster. I couldn't tell which. We had just reached the cellar doors when I heard it, a sound unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. People often describe it as a freight train, but that doesn't capture the all-encompassing primordial nature of it. It was as if the world itself was being torn apart. I yanked open the cellar doors, fighting against the suction of the wind. Max scrambled down the concrete steps, and I followed, pulling the heavy doors closed behind us just as something large and heavy, later I would discover it was our porch swing, slammed against them. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see Max trembling. I wasn't doing much better myself. The walls of our concrete shelter shook with the force of the storm above, dust falling from the ceiling with each violent gust. I held Max close and waited, listening to the sound of destruction overhead. The worst of the storm passed over us in about 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. The roaring gradually subsided, replaced by the steady drumming of heavy rain. My phone had no service, but the radio still worked, broadcasting emergency information and warnings to remain sheltered. "It's okay, Max," I whispered, stroking his fur. "I think the worst is over." I was wrong. According to the meteorologist on the radio, we were in the eye of the system, a brief respite before the second half of the storm would hit. I decided to use this opportunity to quickly check on the house and grab anything essential we might need if we had to remain in the cellar longer. I cracked open the cellar doors and peered out. The scene was apocalyptic. Part of our roof had been torn away. The massive oak tree that had stood by our driveway for probably 100 years was now lying across what remained of my truck. Debris from neighboring properties, pieces of metal roofing, wooden boards, even what looked like a refrigerator door, were scattered across our yard. The sky above was an unnatural stillness, a perfect circle of calm surrounded by rotating walls of dark clouds. The air felt charged, as if filled with electricity. I secured Max to a pipe in the cellar and told him to stay, then ventured out to salvage what I could from the house. The structure was still standing, but with significant damage. Water poured through the holes in the roof, soaking our belongings. I grabbed our important documents, some additional food, and Sarah's medication from the kitchen cabinet. As I was about to head back to the cellar, I heard a sound that stopped me cold. A faint cry for help, coming from somewhere outside. I stood frozen in my damaged kitchen, straining to hear over the distant rumble of the approaching second wave of the storm. There it was again. Definitely a human voice, calling for help from the direction of the road. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to return to the cellar immediately. The meteorologist had been clear. The second half of the storm could be even worse than the first. I had perhaps 10 minutes before it hit. But someone was out there, possibly injured, definitely in danger. I grabbed my heavy raincoat and flashlight and stepped outside. The wind was already picking up again, the eye of the storm beginning to close. I shouted into the darkness, moving toward the road where our driveway had once been, now blocked by the fallen oak. "Hello? Where are you?" I called out, scanning the area with my flashlight. A weak voice responded from beyond the tree. "Here. Please. I'm trapped." I climbed over the massive trunk, scraping my leg on a broken branch but barely noticing the pain. My flashlight beam finally found him, a young man, maybe in his early 20s, pinned beneath a metal beam that had come from God knows where. His car was nearby, crushed by another fallen tree. He must have been driving when the tornado hit. "My name's Daniel," I told him, kneeling beside him. "I'm going to try to help you." "Tyler," he managed through gritted teeth. "I can't feel my legs." The beam across his lower body was too heavy for me to lift alone, and the sky was darkening rapidly as the eye wall approached. I had minutes, not hours, to make a decision. I couldn't leave him here to die, but I couldn't stay with him either, or we'd both be killed when the second wave hit. "Tyler, listen to me," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I'm going to have to leave you for a few minutes to get something to help move this beam. The storm is coming back, and we need to hurry." Fear flashed in his eyes. "Don't leave me out here, man. Please." "I promise I'll come back," I said, already backing away. "Just hold on." I ran back to our barn, which had somehow remained partially standing. Inside, I found what I was looking for, a car jack and a length of sturdy rope. By the time I made it back to Tyler, the wind was howling again, and the first drops of rain had begun to fall. Working against the clock and the increasingly violent weather, I positioned the jack under the beam, pinning Tyler. My hands shook as I cranked it, raising the heavy metal just enough to slide him out from under it. His legs were badly injured, possibly broken, and he screamed in pain as I moved him. "I can't walk," he gasped when I tried to help him stand. "Then I'll carry you," I replied, though I wasn't sure how I'd manage it. Tyler was thin but tall, and the cellar was a good 100 yards away now. The storm was upon us again, rain coming down in sheets so thick I could barely see. I hoisted Tyler onto my back in a fireman's carry and began the arduous journey back toward safety. The wind nearly knocked us down several times, and flying debris became deadly projectiles in the strengthening gusts. Something struck my shoulder, a tree branch or piece of metal, I couldn't tell, sending a jolt of pain down my arm. I stumbled, but kept moving forward. Tyler's labored breathing in my ear, the only indication he was still conscious. Max was barking furiously by the time we neared the cellar, the sound barely audible over the storm. I practically fell down the steps with Tyler, managing to pull the doors closed against the suction of the wind, just as the full force of the second wave hit. The concrete bunker shook more violently than before. A crack appeared in one wall, water beginning to seep through. Tyler lay on the floor where I'd placed him, pale and in shock. I covered him with a blanket and turned my attention to his injuries, using the first aid kit to stop the bleeding from a deep gash in his thigh. "Why did you do that?" he asked weakly as I worked. "You could have died out there." I didn't have a good answer. It wasn't heroism or nobility, just the impossibility of making any other choice when faced with another human being in need. "We'll be okay," I told him, though I wasn't certain of that at all, as the world above us continued to be torn apart. In that moment, huddled in a leaking concrete bunker with a stranger and my dog, listening to the storm rage overhead, I understood something about humanity that I'd never fully grasped before. Our vulnerability is what connects us. In the face of nature's indifferent power, all we have is each other. And sometimes, that has to be enough. The interstate stretched before me like a ribbon of black satin under the moonlight. I'd been on the road for 14 hours, my eyelids growing heavier with each passing mile marker. My 18-wheeler hummed steadily beneath me, the vibrations so familiar they'd become almost comforting over my 15 years as a long-haul trucker. My name's Ray Callahan, 43 years old, with nothing but a divorced wife in Tulsa and a mortgage on a house I see maybe 5 days a month. The road is my real home, all 46,876 miles of interstate crisscrossing America like veins in a giant body. I know every curve, every dip, every treacherous mountain pass from Maine to California. That night I was hauling refrigerated goods from Chicago to Phoenix, a standard run I'd done dozens of times. The truck stop coffee had worn off somewhere around Kansas City, and the remaining 900 miles felt like an eternity. The CB radio occasionally crackled with the voices of fellow night drivers, their conversations a lifeline in the solitude of midnight America. "Breaker 19, this is Steel Horse. Got a Smoky taking pictures at mile marker 137. Keep your horses steady." I picked up the handset. "Copy that, Steel Horse. Much obliged." These small interactions were sometimes the only human contact I'd have for days. My dispatcher, Linda, called me a loner. Maybe she was right. After my wife left, claiming she was married more to my absence than to me, the solitude of long drives became both my comfort and my prison. The digital clock on my dashboard read 2:17 a.m. when I passed the sign for a small town called Milldale. Never heard of it before, which was strange considering how many times I'd driven this stretch. My GPS showed nothing but I needed fuel, and my logbook said I was due for a mandatory rest period. I figured I'd pull over at the next truck stop. I didn't know then that this decision would change everything. I understood something about humanity that I'd never fully grasped before. Our vulnerability is what connects us. In the face of nature's indifferent power, all we have is each other. And sometimes, that has to be enough. Just before closing my eyes, I glanced toward the other truck again. The figure was gone. Sleep came quickly, but it wasn't peaceful. A tapping on my window jolted me awake. My hand instinctively reached for the flashlight I keep beside my seat, a heavy maglite that could double as a weapon if needed. Long nights on isolated rest stops had taught me caution. A woman's face peered through the glass, illuminated by the harsh glow of the truck stop lights. She looked to be in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and eyes that seemed too large for her thin face. I lowered the window a crack. "Can I help you?" "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, her voice soft and slightly tremulous. "My car broke down about a mile back, and I've been walking for help. The station attendant says there won't be a tow until morning, and I really need to get to Flagstaff. My daughter's in the hospital there." I'd heard every story in the book during my years on the road, and I had a strict policy against picking up hitchhikers. Company policy prohibited passengers anyway. "I've got money for gas," she added quickly, noticing my hesitation. I'm desperate. Please." Something in her voice sounded genuinely pained. I studied her face. No signs of drug use, eyes clear despite the worry in them. My better judgment screamed at me to refuse, but 15 years of long-haul driving had also taught me something about humanity and its struggles. "Where's your car?" I asked. "About a mile east, blue Honda Civic. I can show you." I checked my watch. My 45-minute rest had turned into nearly 2 hours. I was already behind schedule. "I can't go back east," I said, "but I can take you as far as Flagstaff if you're really in a bind. It's on my route." The relief that washed over her face seemed genuine. Thank you so much." I unlocked the passenger door and she climbed in, carrying nothing but a small purse. She introduced herself as Marie and said her 8-year-old daughter had been airlifted to Flagstaff Medical Center after a severe asthma attack while they were on vacation. As we pulled back onto the interstate, the truck stop disappeared behind us, swallowed by the darkness. I couldn't shake a lingering feeling of unease, despite Marie's seemingly authentic gratitude. In my side mirror, I thought I glimpsed the old attendant standing in the lot, watching our departure, but when I checked again, there was nothing there but darkness. Chapter 4. The Confession. 300 miles of desert highway passed in relative silence. Marie would occasionally respond to my attempts at small talk, but mostly she stared out the window at the endless darkness, her reflection ghostly in the glass. I'd turned the radio on low, an old country station playing songs about heartbreak and whiskey. "Do you ever get scared out here?" she asked suddenly, her voice startling after such a long silence. I glanced at her, then back at the road. "Not really. You get used to it." I would. Get scared, I mean. All alone in the vastness. I shrugged. Sometimes the loneliness is the appeal. She turned to look at me fully then, her eyes reflecting the green glow from the dashboard instruments. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question. "Aren't we all?" I deflected, uncomfortable with how easily she'd read me. "I used to think I was running toward something," she said. "A better life. Freedom. Now I realize I've been running away all along." She paused. "You know there's no daughter in Flagstaff, don't you?" My hands tightened on the wheel. "I figured there might be more to your story." Marie looked back out the window. "I'm sorry for lying, but I needed to get away." "From what?" She was quiet for so long, I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the engine noise. "My husband, ex-husband, technically, though he doesn't accept that. He found me in Albuquerque. I've been running for 3 years. I'd encountered my share of people fleeing bad situations. The highways of America are full of them, souls trying to outrun their pasts at 70 miles per hour. He a cop? I asked, suddenly worried that I might be aiding a fugitive in a way that could cost me my job or worse. Worse, she said. He's a prosecutor. He knows how to work the system, has friends in every department in 3 states. Every time I think I'm free, he finds me. I didn't know what to say to that, so we fell back into silence. The miles rolled by, each one taking us further into the empty heart of the American West. Around 4 a.m., I noticed headlights in my mirror, holding steady far behind us. Just another night driver, I told myself, but something about their constant presence made me uneasy. Do you believe in second chances, Ray? Marie asked eventually. I believe in survival, I answered honestly. Everything else is just hope. She nodded as if I'd confirmed something for her. Hope is expensive. The headlights behind us were getting closer. Chapter 5, The Pursuit. The high beams hit my mirrors like searchlights, blinding me momentarily. The vehicle had closed the distance between us rapidly, now riding my bumper despite the empty lanes beside us. Is that him? I asked, glancing at Marie. Her face had gone pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the door handle. I don't know. Maybe. I maintained my speed, steady at 65. The vehicle behind, I could now see it was a dark SUV, swerved into the passing lane and accelerated alongside us. I caught a glimpse of the driver. A man in his 40s, his face partially illuminated by the glow of his dashboard. That's him, Marie whispered, shrinking into her seat. That's Edward. The SUV pulled ahead of us, then swerved sharply into my lane, forcing me to slam on the brakes. The 18-wheeler lurched, tons of metal protesting the sudden deceleration. My cargo shifted ominously behind me. What the hell is he doing? I muttered, fighting to maintain control. He's going to get us all killed. The SUV's brake lights flashed as he slowed directly in front of us, clearly trying to force me to stop. I weighed my options quickly. Company policy was clear. Avoid confrontation, call the authorities, protect the cargo. But we were in the middle of nowhere. My cell signal was weak at best, and Marie's fear was palpable beside me. Hold on, I told her and made a decision. I downshifted and swerved into the passing lane, accelerating to get around the SUV. For a moment I thought we'd make it, but the other vehicle matched my maneuver, cutting me off again. This time, he came to a complete stop diagonally across both lanes. I brought the truck to a halt about 50 feet from the SUV, my mind racing through options. The CB radio crackled with distant chatter, none of it relevant to our isolated stretch of highway. The driver's door of the SUV opened, and a man stepped out. Even in the dim light of dawn, I could see he was well dressed, his movements precise and controlled as he walked toward us. He didn't look like my idea of an abuser, but then they rarely do. That's far enough. I called out the window as he approached. Get back in your vehicle and move it. You're blocking a commercial vehicle. He stopped, his face professionally calm. I'm just here for my wife. This doesn't concern you. Marie was trembling beside me. Ray, please don't let him take me. I reached for my CB radio. I'm calling this in. Edward's composed demeanor cracked slightly. She's sick. Mentally ill. Has she told you about her imaginary daughter yet? Or maybe it was her mother this time, dying of cancer. I glanced at Marie, whose eyes were fixed on Edward with naked terror. He's lying, she whispered. That's what he does. He twists everything. Edward took another step toward the truck. I'm a district attorney. Interfering with me could be construed as obstruction of justice. All I want is to take my sick wife home and get her the help she needs. His words were reasonable, his tone measured, but something cold in his eyes made my skin crawl. I'd seen all kinds of darkness on the highway at night. This man carried his inside him, hidden behind credentials and authority. I made another decision then, one that would change multiple lives forever. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. Get in the sleeper cab, I told Marie quietly. not taking my eyes off Edward. She didn't move at first, frozen by indecision and fear. "Now," I insisted, "and stay down." Once she had disappeared behind the curtain that separated my sleeping quarters from the driving cabin, I opened my door and climbed down from the truck, keeping the massive vehicle between me and Edward. "Let's talk reasonably," I called to him. "Nobody needs to get hurt here." Edward's face twisted into something ugly. "You're harboring my wife. Do you have any idea who I am? What I can do to your life with one phone call?" I'd met men like him before, men who believed their titles and positions placed them above consequences, men who controlled others through fear and intimidation. "I know exactly who you are," I replied steadily. "I've seen your kind before." His false composure completely evaporated. "You're a truck driver, a nobody. I can have your job, your license, everything." As he ranted, I quietly reached behind me, feeling for the release lever on the air brakes. My truck was positioned on a slight incline facing downhill toward his SUV. "If I release the pressure, you're making a mistake," Edward said, taking another step toward me, his hand moving inside his jacket. "A terminal mistake." I pulled the release. The sound of rushing air was followed by the groan of metal as my fully loaded 18-wheeler began to roll forward. Edward's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. He lunged back toward his vehicle, but it was too late. The impact was deafening. The crunch of metal, the explosive shattering of glass as my truck's massive front end collided with his SUV, pushing it sideways across the asphalt. I jumped clear, watching as both vehicles continued their momentum toward the guardrail. The SUV hit first, the barrier buckling but holding. My truck came to rest against it, effectively pinning Edward's vehicle against the rail above a steep ravine. Edward himself had been caught between the vehicles, not fully crushed but trapped, his lower body pinned. His screams cut through the sudden silence as dawn broke over the desert landscape. I climbed back into my cab, finding Marie wide-eyed in the sleeper section. "We have to call for help," I said, reaching for my phone. Marie stared at me, then at the scene visible through the windshield. Her husband trapped and injured, sunrise painting the sky blood-red behind him. "Yes," she said finally, "we should." As I dialed 911, reporting an accident without elaborating on the circumstances, I wondered about the decisions that had led us all here. Marie's flight, Edward's pursuit, my intervention. The chain of choices that ended on this lonely stretch of highway with the dawn breaking over 3 lives irrevocably altered. They say long-haul trucking is about endurance, about making it through the night to see another dawn. Sometimes, though, the new day brings not relief, but reckoning. And as I watched the sun climb higher while waiting for the distant wail of sirens, I knew some highways, once taken, can never be undriven. The open road had witnessed it all, silent and indifferent, stretching endlessly toward a horizon none of us could see. It started off the way most house parties do: too many people, too much noise, and too little space. My parents were out of town for the weekend, and I figured a small get-together wouldn't hurt. Just a few friends, some music, a couple drinks. But word got out. By 9 p.m., the living room was packed. The kitchen smelled like spilled beer and pizza grease, and I could barely hear myself think. I told myself I was still in control. We lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside Portland. Tree-lined streets, well-trimmed hedges, and front porches with wind chimes that never rang too loud. It was the kind of suburb that felt frozen in time, safe, predictable, where every mailbox looked the same and every neighbor waved but never lingered. The kind of place where people peeked through curtains more often than they knocked on doors. Our house was a modest, 2-story colonial with gray siding and a squeaky screen door that no one had bothered to fix in years. The backyard stretched farther than it looked from the street, lined with pines and a fence that had been half replaced, half forgotten. My parents had left that morning for a business retreat in Bend, Oregon. A 3-day trip. They were the type to leave detailed instructions about the thermostat and watering schedule, but trusted me enough not to burn the place down. I spent the afternoon cleaning, setting up folding chairs, filling the fridge with cheap beer and soda. By the time the sun slipped behind the trees, the speakers were thumping, people were crowding the hallway, and the music had started shaking the windows. I stood in the kitchen with a red cup, watching strangers laugh in the living room. I knew maybe half the people there. At first, it didn't bother me. Parties blur together after a while. Some people came with friends of friends. I nodded, smiled, kept a drink in my hand. Then I noticed him, a guy in a dark windbreaker, standing near the hallway that led to the basement. He wasn't talking to anyone, just watching. I didn't recognize him. He didn't look drunk. His stance was too controlled, too deliberate. He wasn't swaying like the others or fumbling for his phone. He didn't even have a cup in his hand. Just stood there, hands in his pockets, like he wasn't really part of the party at all. Something about him was off. But not in an obvious way. It was the subtle kind of wrong that doesn't hit you until your instincts start buzzing. His eyes didn't scan the room like everyone else's. They didn't flick from one group to another, laughing at inside jokes or searching for someone to talk to. They were locked, fixed on one spot with unsettling intensity. Me. At first I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe he was just zoned out. But every time I glanced his way, his gaze was still there. Not aggressive. Not friendly. Just present, silent, heavy. Every time I turned around, I could feel it again, like a cold draft that only I seemed to notice. He was watching me. I started asking around. Quietly. Friends, neighbors, people I trusted. Nobody knew him. Nobody had invited him. When I checked the basement door, it was unlocked. I hadn't opened it. Around 11:40 p.m., the power cut. Music stopped. Lights went out. People laughed, thinking it was part of the party. But I felt it. That shift in the room. Like something was wrong. While people used phone flashlights and joked about candles, I slipped away and checked the breaker. It wasn't tripped. That's when I heard footsteps in the basement. Heavy ones. Slow. I called out. No answer. My voice sounded too loud in the sudden silence, bouncing down the hallway like it didn't belong to me. Heart pounding, I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer near the sink. Its plastic casing felt slippery in my palm. I clicked it on and made my way slowly toward the basement. The door was wide open. It hadn't been before. Faint streaks of mud trailed from the hallway into the dark stairwell. Footprints, smeared and irregular, like someone had stumbled or moved in a hurry. I hesitated at the top step, shined the beam downward. The basement was mostly unfinished. Concrete floor, exposed beams, dusty shelves stacked with old boxes. But that night, it felt like a different place entirely. The shadows down there didn't feel passive. They felt like they were watching. I stepped down one stair, then another. Halfway down, the flashlight flickered, and that's when I saw it. Not clearly, just the outline of something hunched in the far corner. Broad shoulders, a metallic glint near its feet, like a tool or a pipe. And then, a whisper. Not words, just breath and intent. I ran. I didn't wait to see if it followed. I didn't want to know. The cops came. Party broke up. They didn't find anything. No signs of forced entry. Nothing taken. But the door was open. The prints were real. And a guest list never lies. There was one name no one could trace. And I swear every time I close the basement door now I hear it creak open again. Like someone never really left. I was headed north on I-87 through upstate New York, trying to make it to my sister's place in Vermont before midnight. I'd left too late, but I told myself the roads would stay clear enough. It was early January. The sun had dipped behind the hills by 4:30 p.m. By 6, the snow started, soft at first, then heavier. Within an hour, visibility had dropped to almost nothing. The radio warned of whiteout conditions, and the GPS rerouted me 3 times. Still, I kept driving. Stupid, maybe, but I didn't want to stop on a shoulder and freeze. By 7:30 p.m., I hadn't seen another car in almost 20 minutes, and a creeping unease had started to settle in my chest. The road looked like it hadn't been plowed in hours, just a ghostly ribbon buried beneath waves of thick, wind-driven snow. My windshield wipers could barely keep up, dragging sluggishly across the glass, smearing more than they cleared. I slowed to 30 miles an hour. Even that felt reckless. The tires hummed a low, uncertain vibration beneath me, gripping the road with less confidence by the minute. The trees on either side of the highway became blurry outlines. Tall, dark forms swaying slightly in the wind like silent sentinels watching me pass. Snow whipped across the beams of my headlights, streaking by like static on an old television screen. There were no road signs, no landmarks, no towns, just the same unending white. Cold, silent, the kind of silence that feels alive, pressing in from all sides. It felt like I'd slipped into another world, one where I wasn't supposed to be. Around 8:15, I saw a sign for a rest area, a tiny green rectangle barely visible through the snow. I turned in, tires crunching through the buildup. The rest stop was nothing more than a looped drive with a couple of picnic tables and a small cinder block building. No lights, no plows, just wind and snow. I parked under a dead lamppost and killed the engine, just to rest my eyes. Just for a minute. But then I saw it. A car was parked across the lot, facing me. I hadn't seen it pull in. The windshield was covered in snow, but the driver's silhouette was visible, not moving. I waited. 1 minute. 2. Still no movement. I flashed my headlights. Nothing. Then I saw a second car roll slowly into the lot, then a third. All of them stopped. All of them facing me. I tried to back up, but the snow was too deep. My wheels spun. The back end skidded sideways. I was boxed in now, the cars forming a half circle around me. No one got out. No lights inside. No movement. Just running engines, their exhaust barely visible in the cold. I locked the doors. I honked, rolled my window down an inch and yelled. No reaction. I got out, stood by my car, the snow soaking through my boots in seconds. I shouted again. Are you okay? Still nothing. I approached the nearest car. The windows were fogged. I wiped the glass with my glove and looked inside. There was no one behind the wheel. The cars were still running, exhaust curling faintly into the cold air and vanishing almost as soon as it appeared. From one of them, a scratchy old country song drifted out, something about being lost and alone, the lyrics warbling as if from a faraway radio. Another vehicle had a child's toy, a stuffed rabbit, dangling from the rearview mirror, slowly spinning on its thread like a pendulum. But no one was inside. Not in any of them. The interiors were empty, but strangely lived in. A half-drunk coffee sat in a cup holder. A phone charger dangled from a dash. A wallet lay open on a passenger seat. It was as if everyone had just stepped out for a moment and never came back. I tried to leave on foot, thinking I could make it to the highway and flag someone down. But the storm had swallowed the road. Visibility was so poor, I couldn't see more than 5 feet ahead. I wandered in circles, my boots sinking into the snow, my jacket already soaked through. Trees loomed out of nowhere, disorienting me even further. I made it 20, maybe 30 yards into the woods before panic set in. My body was going numb, and my sense of direction was useless. Everything looked the same. White, shapeless, endless. I stumbled back the way I thought I came. Back to the rest stop. Back to the cars. Still running, still empty. And now it felt like they were waiting for me. I sat in my car the entire night. I left the heat on low, the radio off. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, the sun was rising, pale and weak behind the snow-covered sky. The other cars were gone. No tire tracks, no signs anyone had ever been there. I told my sister. She thought I dreamed it. Snow hallucinations, stress, fatigue, but I remember the engines, the music, the way the cars stared me down like animals just outside the firelight. I still take that highway sometimes, but I never stop at that rest area. Not anymore. It was supposed to be our reset weekend. Emma and I had been together for 3 years, and lately things had felt strained. Work stress, family drama, the usual. So when she found a discounted cabin rental near the base of Windham Mountain, we booked it without thinking twice. A long weekend of snow, quiet, and no cell service. Just us. The cabin was simple. Wood-paneled walls, stone fireplace, a loft bedroom, and a kitchen that smelled like pine cleaner and old coffee. It sat tucked back from the main road, half a mile up a private drive that disappeared in fresh snow. It was perfect. The first morning, we woke to clear skies and powdery snow. We layered up, packed granola bars and a thermos of coffee, and hit the slopes early. By 10 a.m., we were carving through tree runs. The mountain was quiet. Weekday mornings always are, and for the first time in weeks, I felt light. At lunch, we sat outside the lodge, our boots kicked up on the railing, steam rising from our cups. That's when I noticed him. He stood at the edge of the rental hut, unmoving, like a shadow carved into the snow. Dressed head to toe in black jacket zipped all the way to his chin, matte black helmet, reflective black goggles that gave no hint of eyes behind them. Even his skis were a deep, flat black that seemed to absorb the sun rather than reflect it. At first, I thought he was just waiting, maybe for a friend or a slow rental. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized he hadn't shifted his weight, hadn't pulled out a phone, hadn't spoken to anyone. No idle gestures, no signs of impatience, just stillness. And the weirdest part, he was facing directly toward us. Not the lift line, not the slope, not the lodge entrance. Us. I tried to brush it off as coincidence, but it felt deliberate, intentional, like he had chosen that spot for a reason, like we were the reason. The next day we saw him again, this time near the top of the main lift. Same outfit, same posture, standing just far enough to make you second guess whether he was even looking at you. Emma didn't notice him at first. When I pointed him out, she gave a short laugh and said, "Maybe he's just socially awkward." But I couldn't shake the feeling. He was always there, never skiing, never talking, just watching. That afternoon, we took a less traveled back route through the woods. Narrow, quiet. The kind of run that twists through the trees and makes you feel like you're alone on the mountain. Halfway down, I looked back. He was behind us, distant but unmistakable, black on white. We made it back to the cabin by dusk. I checked my phone, no bars. Emma tried hers. Same, no internet, no messages, no map. We pulled the blinds shut and double-checked the locks, just in case. In the morning, the snow was fresh. But outside the cabin, we saw them, boot prints, leading from the woods to our back door, and back again. I told Emma to stay inside. Her face tightened with worry, but she didn't argue. I took the small hatchet we'd used for firewood. It wasn't much, but it felt better than going empty-handed, and stepped into the snow. The air outside was silent and sharp, the kind of cold that bites through gloves and settles in your bones. My boots crunched softly as I moved toward the tree line, eyes scanning for movement, ears straining for sound. I didn't know what I was expecting. A hiker who got turned around? Some dumb local messing with tourists? Maybe nothing. But what I found was unsettling. A small clearing just beyond the first row of pines. The snow there had been disturbed recently, flattened in places, compacted like someone had paced in circles. In the middle sat a tent, newer than I expected, cheap but clean, like it had been set up just hours before. The flap was unzipped, flapping slightly in the wind. Inside, nothing. No sleeping bag, no food, no gear, just empty space and the faint, stale scent of boot rubber. And above, hanging from a low branch like an ornament, those same black goggles. The exact kind we'd seen on the mountain. They swung lightly in the breeze, reflecting slivers of gray sky. Behind the tent, another path had been trampled into the snow, narrow, winding deeper into the woods. Fresh. I didn't follow it. We left that day. Didn't bother packing, just grabbed our things and drove down the mountain. I filed a report with local rangers. They said they'd check it out, but part of me wonders if they ever did. And sometimes when snow falls heavy in the trees and the world goes silent, I still think about that figure in black, and wonder if he ever left the mountain at all. This story took place during the summer of 2023. Just me, Marcus, and Danny, 3 friends looking for a break from the noise of Denver. We loaded up the truck with camping gear, snacks, and a cooler full of cheap beer. Our plan was simple: drive into the Rockies, find a remote trail, camp out for 2 nights, and forget the world existed. Marcus was the one who found the spot. An old fire road on a topo map that ended near a decommissioned mining site. The kind of place the internet didn't really know about. That's what made it perfect. We left Friday afternoon. By sunset, we were deep in the pines, no cell signal, no trail markers, just us and the trees. We found it the next morning, after following the faint outline of a forgotten trail that wound higher into the mountains than we'd planned. Just when we were about to turn back, we spotted a break in the tree line. A dark patch etched into the base of a ridge. It was an old mine shaft, hewn crudely into the mountainside and half concealed by overgrown brush and fallen rock. Moss crept along the cracked timbers framing the entrance. There were no signs, no posted warnings, not even rusted chains or boards to keep anyone out. Just a wide, breathless silence and a gaping black mouth in the rock. The opening was barely tall enough for us to crouch into. It didn't look like much. Just a shallow tunnel, maybe, but something about it felt ancient, forgotten, too quiet. Marcus's eyes lit up. He grew up hearing stories about mines like this. His grandfather had worked in one, and he treated every abandoned shaft like a museum exhibit. He paced the entrance like a kid outside a candy store. Danny stood back, arms crossed, chewing her lip. "We shouldn't go in," she said. "Could be unstable, or worse." She wasn't wrong. I felt it too, that tension, that hum in the air like the rocks were holding their breath. But out there, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and silence, curiosity speaks louder than caution. We agreed to check it out. "Just a quick look," we said. Famous last words. We brought headlamps and a spare flashlight. The air inside was still and cold, like the walls had swallowed every sound. Wooden beams held up the ceiling, and rusted rails ran into the dark. It wasn't deep, not at first. Just a long corridor that curved slightly, enough to hide what lay ahead. We walked slowly, calling out now and then. Our voices came back wrong, flattened. That's when we found the first mark. Scratches on the wall. Deep ones, fresh. We found the chamber maybe 200 feet in, a widened space with collapsed timbers and tools scattered in the dirt. Old things, pickaxes, the lantern parts, a boot half buried in gravel, and in the center a circle of stones, deliberately placed, newer than anything else. There were ashes inside. Danny wanted to turn back. Marcus said it was probably a campfire from some hiker. But I saw something in those stones, too careful, too clean. We argued, then agreed to head back. But the tunnel behind us looked different. It started as a faint knock, sharp and deliberate, like stone tapping against stone in a rhythmic beat. Then came a low dragging sound, like something heavy scraping against the floor of the tunnel. We froze where we stood. Instinct kicked in. Headlamps off. Darkness swallowed us. Not just the absence of light, but the kind that settles into your chest and squeezes. You could feel it pressing against your face, your arms, your breath. The air turned still and dense, like the mine was holding its breath too. Marcus leaned close, whispering something I couldn't make out, his voice too soft, too shaken. Then came another knock. Louder. Closer. The dragging grew into a rhythmic pull, like something was being hauled across gravel by unseen hands. The sound wasn't echoing, it was following. That broke the trance. We turned and bolted, slamming into beams and loose rocks as we scrambled backward, arms out, lungs burning. The tunnel walls blurred past us. We didn't stop running until we saw light again. We made it out, or at least we thought we did. The trees looked the same, but wrong. The trail markers we left, gone. No birds, no wind, and no signal. Our compass spun. We hiked for hours, ended up back at the mine. That night, we stayed by the fire. Danny wouldn't sleep. Marcus kept scanning the tree line. I checked my camera. I'd taken a photo of the stone circle, but the picture was gone. In its place was a black frame, with a timestamp. 3:17 a.m. None of us were awake then. We went back in, not because we wanted to, because we had to. Something in that place was watching, waiting. Every hour we stayed above ground, the woods closed in more. The mine was the only place that felt real. Only 2 of us made it out. I don't know what happened to the third. 1 second he was behind us, and the next, he wasn't. We called his name until our voices cracked, searched until the light burned out. But we never found him. We filed no reports, told no one. We left that mountain and never looked back, at least not out loud. Sometimes I dream of that tunnel, its impossible silence, the sound of dragging gravel. And when I wake up, there's dirt under my nails. Whatever we disturbed down there didn't want to be found. And I'm not sure it ever let us go. It started as a joke. I was home from college for the summer, stuck in a nowhere town in upstate New York, where nothing ever happened. 3 of us, me, Leo, and Tasha, had been friends since high school, and we were bored enough to do anything dumb that felt remotely thrilling. So when Leo said we should check out the old Hawthorne amusement park, the one that shut down a decade ago after a string of lawsuits, it didn't take much convincing. Just a walk through, he said. At night, flashlights only, in and out. It was supposed to be fun. The place was a skeleton of what it once was, a forgotten husk where laughter used to echo. Rusted metal rides stood like eerie sculptures, warped by years of exposure. Vines twisted up through the joints of the Ferris wheel, and weeds burst through cracks in the asphalt, like nature reclaiming a curse. The ticket booths had shattered windows, glass still glittering faintly under the moonlight, and old paper stubs littered the ground like fallen leaves. The carousel sat crooked on its track, half dismantled, its horses frozen mid-gallop. One was missing its head entirely. Another had a single glass eye that still reflected light. The paint peeled in long curls, exposing the dull wood underneath. And every time the wind blew, it made the whole structure creak softly, as if it were still trying to turn. The gate wasn't locked, just chained loosely, hanging from the rusted bars like a suggestion rather than a warning. Someone had spray-painted "Keep Out" in red, but the letters had faded to a pinkish smear. We slipped in under moonlight, ducking past the gate. Our footsteps echoed on the gravel and crunched over broken glass, each sound louder than it should have been. It was colder than I expected. The kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin, it creeps under it. And it was quiet, not peaceful quiet. The kind that makes your ears ring, like the world is holding its breath. Too quiet. There was a faded park map still posted near the entrance. Most of it was weathered into nonsense, but a few locations were still readable. The Tilt-A-Whirl, Tunnel of Love, Screamer Coaster. Leo wanted to find the Screamer. Tallest ride in the state, he said, back in the day. Tasha and I followed, trading nervous jokes, pointing our flashlights at old food stands and claw machines that still had dusty plush toys inside. We weren't alone. Somewhere near the Dodgem cars, we heard it. A clink, a metal-on-metal rattle, like something moving. We froze. Wind, Leo said quickly. Probably just a sign blowing. But there was no wind. We moved slower after that. We found them near the coaster platform. Footprints in the dirt. Fresh. Not ours. Too large. Too deep. Heading in a straight line through the overgrowth. Tasha wanted to leave. I did too. But Leo followed them. And we followed Leo. At the top of the Screamer's loading area, there was a booth. The door hung open. Inside were old controls, scattered manuals, and a chair facing the ride. The weird part? Someone had cleared the dust. A circle. Right around the chair. Recent. And on the panel, a single note scrawled in Sharpie. It only stops if you scream. Leo climbed into the first car of the train, his boots crunching against the dusty metal floor. Just to mess around, he called over his shoulder with a grin, settling into the weathered seat and grabbing the rusted safety bar. It creaked but didn't lock. Tasha's voice cracked as she called out to him. Leo, don't. Seriously, get out. This isn't funny. I stepped toward him, the unease knotting in my chest tightening. Come on, man. This place is falling apart. That thing shouldn't even move. Leo rolled his eyes. It won't. Chill. It's just for a photo. Then, without warning, the car jolted. We all flinched. No power, no lights, no engine hum. Just motion. Slow, deliberate, the kind that doesn't feel accidental. I stepped back, flashlight shaking in my grip. Tasha gasped. The train creaked forward, wheels groaning as if waking from a long sleep. And then faster. The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the night as the coaster gained speed, vanishing into the track's shadowy mouth. The Screamer roared to life like it had been waiting for this moment. We ran down the platform, screaming his name. The train vanished into the dark track. No sound, no scream, no crash, nothing. Tasha cried. I tried to call for help, no signal. We waited and waited. He never came back. The police found nothing. No tracks, no movement, no sign of Leo. They said we were drunk, delusional, that he ran off. But the next night I went back, just to look. The note was gone, but someone had drawn a new one on the glass. You didn't scream. They said the storm would pass by midnight, but by 8 p.m., the rain was still slamming the earth with unrelenting fury. It hadn't let up since noon. Sheets of it came down at a slant, like nature was throwing itself sideways against the world. The windows of my cabin in central Kentucky trembled with each gust of wind, as though the storm was trying to claw its way inside. Thunder didn't crash so much as it rumbled, deep, slow, and constant. It echoed through the hills like something alive, something pacing just beyond the tree line. The air inside the cabin was damp, the smell of wet wood and smoke from the afternoon fire mingling into something vaguely sour. I wasn't even supposed to be here alone. The original plan was to meet up with 3 friends at the lake for a long weekend. Cabin, fishing, beer, easy fun. But one by one, they canceled. Work, family, some flu going around. I came anyway. I told myself I wanted the quiet, that I needed a break from traffic and screens and endless noise. But I hadn't known that quiet could feel like a presence. Like a thing watching you breathe. Like a tension that built with every drop of rain. And now, I wasn't sure I'd made the right call. The cabin belonged to a cousin I hadn't seen in years. He used it as a hunting lodge. 1 room, a kitchenette, and a loft bed. No internet, no cell signal. Just a wood stove, some canned food, and an old battery-powered radio. The power went out around 9:15 p.m. 1 minute I was reading by lamplight, the next I was staring at my reflection in the dark window, listening to the wind scream through the trees. I lit 2 candles and sat at the small wooden table, trying not to notice how the shadows danced differently every time the lightning flashed. It came at 10:41 p.m. A knock. 2 short taps on the door. Then nothing. I froze. I hadn't seen a car. Hadn't heard anyone approach. The gravel path outside the cabin was soaked, and the nearest neighbor was over 5 miles away. I walked to the door slowly, every floorboard betraying me with a creak. I didn't call out, just pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. When I opened it, there was no one there. I told myself it was a tree branch, a gust of wind. something explainable. Until I found the footprints. Boot prints, fresh, leading from the tree line to the steps, and then nothing. No prints going back. That's when I locked the door, blocked it with a chair, and sat with the fire poker in my lap, listening. At 11:32 p.m., I heard something behind the cabin. A soft thud, then a slow scrape across the back wall. There's only one window back there. I didn't want to look, but I did. Someone was standing just beyond the glass, pale. Still, head slightly tilted like they were studying me. When lightning flashed again, they were gone. I turned on the battery radio, hoping for a voice, a weather update, anything to make the cabin feel less isolated, less buried under the storm. At first, just static, crackling and hissing like rain falling inside the speaker. I turned the dial slowly, leaning closer, desperate for a familiar voice or forecast. Then it came. Not a broadcast, not a station, just a voice. Low. Distorted. Male. Don't open it again. That was all. 5 words then gone. Swallowed back by static so thick it buzzed in my ears. I stared at the radio for what felt like minutes, waiting for more. Nothing. I turned it off, set it on the table like it might bite me, and I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. I just sat there, clutching the poker in my lap, listening to the storm howl around me and wondering what exactly I'd opened. It came at 12:47 a.m. Same knock, same rhythm, but this time it came from the back door, the one I didn't know the cabin had until that moment. I stayed awake until sunrise. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. Light finally crept through the trees. I packed up, got in my truck, and didn't look back. The road was muddy. Branches littered the gravel, but I made it out. I went back weeks later, out of stubbornness, curiosity. I wanted to prove I'd imagined it. The front door was ajar. The chair I'd used to block it had been moved to the center of the room. The back door? Still locked. But on the window was a message written in the condensation. You looked. I moved into the house on a Tuesday. It was a modest rental tucked at the edge of a quiet neighborhood in Pennsylvania. A 2-story colonial with faded blue siding, a sagging front porch, and a for rent sign that looked like it had weathered more than a few storms. The rent was low, the landlord seemed decent, and I needed a place fast after a breakup that left more than just emotional damage. The house had a smell to it, old wood, dust, and something faintly metallic, but I chalked it up to age. I didn't ask questions, I just needed space. The first few days passed quietly. I worked remotely, unpacked boxes, and explored the town when I could. The neighbors kept to themselves. A retired couple to one side, a young family to the other. No one said much more than hello. The house creaked at night, floorboards shifted, the wind made the siding moan. But it didn't feel haunted, it felt abandoned. Like it had been waiting. I slept with the windows cracked and a fan on. I didn't go near the basement. Not yet. The basement door was in the kitchen, painted the same dull white as the rest of the walls, almost trying too hard to blend in. At first, I barely noticed it. But as the days passed, I found myself glancing at it more than I meant to. Something about it felt out of place. Not wrong, exactly, just quietly insistent. The knob turned with a smoothness that didn't match the rest of the old house. No resistance, no squeak. The hinges, unlike every other door that groaned or clicked in protest, opened in eerie silence. It was too easy. When I finally opened it, I was met with a wall of darkness so complete it felt like the air had been sucked out of it. The wooden stairs descended steeply, swallowed by shadow. There was no light switch, not inside or around the frame, just an empty socket where one might have been. A cold breeze rolled up from the depths. Not the cool of a drafty cellar, but a sharp, unsettling chill that raised goosebumps along my arms. I stared down into it for a moment longer than I meant to. Then I shut the door and told myself I'd explore it when I had a reason to. It started 4 nights later. A faint thud. Then a scrape, like something being dragged. I paused my music, stood in the kitchen. Another thud. It was coming from beneath the floor. I opened the basement door again. The air that met me was colder than it should have been. But this time, I went down. The flashlight beam barely cut through the dark, casting a weak, shaky circle of light that danced across the floor. The basement was colder than it had any right to be, and the silence was heavy, like the room had been sealed off from sound for years. The stone walls loomed around me, slick with condensation, their surfaces veined with long cracks like broken glass frozen in time. In places, the mortar had crumbled away, revealing gaps that looked deep enough to hide things. The smell was thick, rust, mildew, and something else underneath. Something sour and old, like wet metal and decaying wood. Boxes lined the far wall in uneven stacks. Their cardboard sides had bowed from years of dampness, and the tape had yellowed and curled like dried skin. I moved closer and brushed dust from one. No labels, no writing. Just silence pressing in. And then, in the center of the floor, surrounded by a halo of cleared dust and cobwebs, a hatch. Rectangular, heavy-looking, metal, matte gray, and bolted down with thick screws at each corner. Scratches marred its surface, some shallow, some gouged deep like something had once tried to pry it open. I stared at it, heart thudding in my ears. I didn't open it. Not then. Behind one of the boxes, I found an old handheld camcorder, still intact. The last tape inside was labeled only with a date, March 3rd, 2011. I played it that night on my laptop with a converter. The footage was shaky, a man's voice breathing hard, a flashlight swinging, the basement, then the hatch, then darkness. I started digging. Public records, newspaper archives, police reports. The house had once belonged to a man named Walter Griggs. He'd gone missing in 2011. Case unsolved. The last place he was seen? This house. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went back down, tools in hand. I unbolted the hatch, expecting storage, a drain, a hole. What I found was a tunnel, narrow, hand-dug, sloping down into the earth, and in the dirt at the edge, scratches, fingernails. I reported everything. Police took the tape, blocked off the basement, brought in forensic teams. They said it would take time, that the tunnel went deeper than they expected. That's all I know. I moved out the next week, but I still hear it sometimes. The scrape, the thud, and I still don't know if Walter was the last one down there. I was 7 the summer we drove down to Florida. My parents had saved up for months for a proper vacation, just the 3 of us. Theme parks, seafood diners, a beach with shells scattered like candy on the sand. We stayed in a mid-range hotel just outside Orlando. Beige walls, chlorinated pool, and carpeted hallways that all looked the same. I remember thinking the ice machine down the hall was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. My parents were happy. Tired, but happy. I had my own bed, cartoons on the TV, and a tiny balcony where I could see the pool. It should have been just another summer memory. Room 214. Second floor, middle of the building. Elevator at one end, stairs at the other. We were across from a small vending alcove, nestled between 2 peeling beige columns, and 2 doors down from the ice machine that whirred and rattled like it was trying to shake itself apart. I remember it clearly because I was obsessed with buying snacks. It was one of the first times my parents let me do something alone, something that felt important. They'd hand me 2 or 3 quarters after dinner, and I'd march proudly to the vending machine like it was a mission. I knew the buttons by heart. C4 was the gummy bears. B2 was the peanut butter crackers. The moment the metal coil spiraled and the snack dropped was magic. Each time, I'd glance down both ends of the hallway, the patterned carpet soft under my feet, the air faintly cold from the AC vents. The hallway was always quiet, sometimes too quiet, the kind of silence that made your ears ring if you stopped walking. The overhead lights flickered now and then, casting a dull yellow glow that made everything look like early evening, frozen in time. That's where it happened. in that quiet, familiar stretch of hallway that had always seemed so harmless. It was the third night. I woke up thirsty. The AC was too cold and I couldn't find the water bottle next to my bed. I slid out quietly, careful not to wake my parents, and opened the door. The hallway light buzzed faintly. I padded down to the vending area, grabbed a soda, and turned around. He was there. A man, standing halfway down the hallway, watching. He smiled. "Out late, huh?" I didn't answer, just nodded and started walking back. "Hey," he said, stepping closer. "Want to see something cool?" I froze. I remember the carpet against my bare feet, the soda cold in my hand. His shoes were old and dirty, his jacket too heavy for Florida. He knelt down slowly, like someone coaxing a stray dog. "It's right around the corner. Come on, I'll show you." His voice was low, calm. I didn't move, didn't speak. My legs were shaking. Then a door opened. A woman stepped out of a nearby room, holding a laundry bag. She looked at me, looked at him. He straightened up fast and walked away without a word. The woman asked if I was okay. I couldn't talk. I just nodded and ran back to my room. I locked the door behind me and curled up in bed. I didn't tell my parents until the morning. They were furious. We told the hotel, called the police. But he was gone. No cameras in that part of the hallway. No name, no face, just my memory. An officer came by the hotel later that day, tall and serious, with tired eyes like he'd had too many conversations like this one. He crouched down a little to meet my height, and his voice was soft, careful. He handed me a juice box first, then flipped open a thin notepad and clicked his pen. "Can you tell me what he looked like? Anything you remember." I described the jacket. Thick, dark, looked like it didn't belong in Florida heat. I told him how the man crouched down when he spoke to me, like someone trying to appear non-threatening. I mentioned his shoes, dirty, scuffed, one lace dragging. The officer's pen moved slowly, deliberately. He didn't interrupt. When I mentioned the way the man smiled, he stopped writing for a moment. He nodded slowly, like he'd heard something similar before, like there was a part of the story he already knew. Then he pulled out a binder filled with grainy black and white photographs. Mugshots, probably. He slid it across the table to me. "Do any of these look familiar? Take your time." I turned page after page, hoping something would click. But every face looked wrong. I shook my head. "I'm sorry. I don't know." He gave a small, understanding nod. "That's okay. You did good." We never stayed in a hotel again. For years I couldn't sleep unless the door was locked, the chain latched, the curtains shut tight. I'd wake up at night remembering his voice, the way he said, "Want to see something cool?" I never told my friends. It felt too strange, too small, but it shaped everything. As I got older, I thought about that moment more. What if the woman hadn't come out? What if I had followed him? What if I had been just a little more curious? It was so easy to dismiss. Just a weird encounter. Just a guy in a hallway. But I knew better. I had felt the wrongness in my bones. I'm in my 30s now. Married. I have a daughter. We took a road trip last year. Booked a hotel, second floor, room 212. I didn't sleep that night. I stood by the door, listening to the hallway. Imagining footsteps, a voice. I keep this story to myself. But every time I watch my daughter pad across a hotel carpet in bare feet, I remember. Room 214, a soda in my hand, and a man who almost stole my life with a smile. It was supposed to be a quick ride home. The clock above the turnstile said 11:42 p.m. when I stepped into the station. I was coming from a friend's place in Brooklyn, trying to make the last train back to Queens. The platform was mostly empty, just a few scattered figures hunched on benches, faces lit by their phones. It had been a long week. I was tired, wired from caffeine, and regretting the second glass of wine I'd had hours earlier. I just wanted to get home. The air underground always felt thick, warm with the kind of stale moisture that clings to concrete. A few rats darted across the tracks, Fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting that washed-out yellow tint that makes everything look like an old photo. I stood near the middle of the platform, away from the corners. I'd read somewhere it was safer. That's when I noticed him. Tall, hoodie, just standing still near the far end. Not pacing, not checking his phone. Just still. Watching. I tried not to stare, but something about him made my skin crawl. Like the sharp edge of cold metal brushing your neck. He didn't look away when our eyes met. Didn't flinch. Just held the stare, his head slightly tilted to one side as if analyzing me, as if trying to remember where he'd seen me before. But I didn't know him. I would have remembered that face, the unreadable expression, the lack of blink, the calm intensity in his eyes that made my stomach twist. I turned slightly and drifted closer to a young couple who had just come down the stairs, their laughter low and private. I didn't say anything. Just stood nearby, pretending to scroll through my phone. Safety in numbers, right? The train didn't come, and I could feel his eyes still locked on me, just outside my peripheral vision. Watching, the man in the hoodie started walking, slowly, not toward the stairs, not toward the edge, directly toward me. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People move around, people pace. Maybe he just wanted a better view of the tunnel. But he didn't stop, and when he passed under the flickering light, I saw something I can't unsee. He was smiling. I turned and moved quickly toward the other end. Not quite running, but not strolling either. The couple glanced at me, sensing something. I could hear his footsteps behind me, deliberate, steady. Then the train's lights appeared. A slow curve of yellow in the tunnel. I exhaled, relief. But the man didn't slow down. When the train stopped, I darted into the first car and quickly sat near the front. The couple got in another car. I looked around. 2 other passengers. One older man asleep. One woman wearing earbuds, staring at the window. Then the door opened. He stepped in and sat directly across from me. I kept my eyes locked on the reflection in the window, too afraid to turn and face him directly. In the dim light, the glass became a murky mirror, just clear enough to see his posture, upright, unmoving. He was watching me, not blinking. His stare was steady, almost clinical, like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. 3 stops rolled by. The train jolted. The doors opened, people came and went. But he didn't move, not a twitch. Neither did I. I sat perfectly still, hands gripping the strap of my bag so tightly my fingers ached. My heart thudded in my chest, fast and heavy, louder than the low rumble of the train. I was convinced he could hear it, that at any moment he might reach forward. But he didn't. He just kept watching. I stood up suddenly at the next stop. He did too. So I stayed on the train, and he smiled again. I filed a report the next day. Walked into the station office, filled out the paperwork with shaky hands, and described him as best I could. Tall, hoodie, blank expression. They nodded, took notes, and told me the cameras had limited visibility, whatever that meant. I changed my commute, switched lines, left earlier, came home earlier. Told myself it was just a fluke, a creep, nothing more. But sometimes, when I'm alone on a quiet platform and the lights flicker just so, I feel it again. That tight pull in my chest, that invisible weight on the back of my neck. And more than once, I've caught my reflection in the glass, noticing someone else standing behind me, someone who's never there when I turn around. I inherited the farm after my uncle died. It wasn't sudden. He'd been sick for a while, but I hadn't expected him to leave it to me. We weren't close. I hadn't seen him since I was 13, and I remembered the farm mostly in vague images. Long fields, creaky floors, and the smell of soil that lingered in your clothes for days. I was 32 when the letter arrived. The property was mine now, along with a note written in his shaky hand. Keep the fields clean, stay inside at night. I moved in by mid-September. The house sat squarely in the middle of 60 acres of dense cornfields, isolated and exposed. A peeling white two-story structure with weathered shutters, a sagging wraparound porch, and rusted gutters that dripped even when it hadn't rained. The roof was missing shingles, and a screen door hung crooked on its hinges, letting in every breath of wind and whisper of dust. Inside, the house felt abandoned, not recently, but long enough to forget its own rhythm. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell service worth mentioning, and not a single neighbor in sight. Cobwebs clung to the corners of every room. The fridge groaned when I opened it, revealing expired milk, a forgotten jar of pickles, and something unidentifiable wrapped in wax paper. The floors were blanketed in dust, thick enough to record footsteps. Even the air felt heavy, and everything creaked, even the silence, the kind of quiet that made your ears ring. Out back, the barn leaned hard to one side, half collapsed and cloaked in ivy. The doors were chained shut but bowed inward, like they were barely holding back whatever was inside. Nearby stood the old silo, tall and skeletal, its once silver skin faded to a sickly pale orange, streaked with rust and split at the seams. At night, the crickets came alive with such force that it sounded like the earth was vibrating beneath me. But there were moments, brief, sharp silences, that cut through the noise like something had stepped into their rhythm and silenced them all at once. The corn was high, too high for mid-September. It rustled constantly, even when the wind was still. I didn't like walking into it. Something about the way it swallowed sound unsettled me. But I kept the fields clean, pulled weeds, checked the irrigation lines, did what I could. The rows seemed longer than they should have been. And sometimes I felt like I wasn't alone. The first night I stayed in the house, I barely slept. I kept hearing things. Not the regular creaks of an old building, but sharp, precise noises, like footsteps on hardwood, slow and deliberate. I thought it might be an animal, but the front door was still locked. The windows latched. Nothing disturbed, except the back screen door. It was slightly ajar, and I knew I'd closed it. 2 nights later, I saw something in the corn. It was twilight, blue-gray light melting into orange over the hills. When I stepped out to lock the barn, the air was still, thick with the smell of dust and hay. That's when I saw it, just beyond the fence line, at the edge of the cornfield. A flicker of movement, not the quick dart of a raccoon or a deer. Slower, taller, human. It stood between the rows, not moving, perfectly still, like it had always been there. No swaying, no twitching, just a silhouette, outlined in shadow and stalks. Too far to see details, close enough to feel watched. I froze, called out. Nothing. No sound, not even the rustle of corn. I took a step forward, squinting into the rows, and then it was gone. No footsteps, no crunch of dry leaves, just empty rows and the creeping sense that I had made a mistake looking too long. I bought a trail camera the next day and mounted it to a post near the backfield, just to ease my mind. The footage was uneventful, until night 3. At 3:12 a.m., something triggered the motion sensor. The video showed a figure standing at the edge of the field. Then, in the next frame, it was 5 feet closer. Next frame, closer again, and then it was gone. The next day, I found footprints leading to the old silo. I hadn't opened it before. The metal door screeched as I pulled it aside. Inside, there was a mattress on the ground, empty cans, torn clothes, and a wall covered in scratched markings. Dozens of them, like someone was counting the days. That night, I stayed up with the lights off, sat by the window with a flashlight and my grandfather's old shotgun across my lap. At 2:47 a.m., I saw him. A man, thin, barefoot, covered in dirt, watching the house from the field. When I flicked on the light, he didn't run. He just smiled. The sheriff came the next day. They searched the silo, found more signs, tools, rope, a journal filled with nonsense drawings. They never found the man. I moved out 2 weeks later, put the farm on the market. I still have the trail cam footage, and sometimes when I drive past a cornfield, I swear I see someone standing between the rows, waiting.